Good morning. And the year is over. Well, we've got a few hours left, but we're winding down on 2023. It'll be 2024 tomorrow, actually midnight tonight, or however that works out. And somewhere around the world, it's, pushing on that already. So, excuse me. We are in our Bible study time. We've been studying a name like no other. And we've been talking about the name of God and what it means and what it represents. And, sometimes you can say, what's in a name? Well, when it comes to the name of God, a lot. There's a lot in a name. And as our son Jordan would say, words mean something, so choose your words well. That's because he's a black and white kind of guy. But it is true, isn't it? Words do mean something. And when it comes to the name of God, the name of Yahweh, it does matter what's in his name, and it matters that we know about what is in his name. So we've looked at a variety of things, like at the importance of his name, the majesty of his name, the love expressed in God's name, salvation expressed in God's name, and then today we're going to look at the righteousness of God's name. And I'm just going to warn you up front here, we're down to where we got about 20 minutes left here or less, and there's a lot in this. I'm going to try to hit the high points and give you a few things to think about along the way, but we'll see how it works out. All right. The righteousness of God. What do you think of when you hear the word righteousness? You think of righteous, and how does that associate, or how does that connect or communicate with God and who He is? We live in a culture that I don't know about you, but you just I know corruption's always been there. The evil that's in the hearts of men, the human heart. We know it's the potential. We know the capability of it. Seems like it just gets worse and worse every day. But it's always been around. It's always here. But we still have built within us, because we were created in the image of God. We still have this desire for what is good, or what is right, or what is pure. And so God embedded that in our hearts. The wickedness of human trafficking, religious persecution, what we call racism, all of those things are still condemned, even though they seem to have skewed meanings in a lot of ways. But God has put it in our heart and in our conscience what is right and what is wrong. And even the most liberal thinking person who believes that everyone should be able to do what is right in their own eyes, deep down knows that somehow you just can't do that. You can't allow people the freedom to do whatever. So what does that then have to do with the righteousness in the name of God? Well, first of all, I'm going to look at Prophet Jeremiah 23, and old Jeremiah, they even called him gloom and doom, or, their words similar to that, and here'd be Jeremiah. He'd come with a negative message, and everyone would say, here's old gloom and doom coming again, and giving that to us, giving us that message. But when we get to chapter 23 of the book of Jeremiah, then we have some hope, and he begins to interject hope into things, hope into people, because he lived during the time when the northern kingdom had fallen, and the southern kingdom, the tribe of Israel, the tribe of Judah, they were there, and they were about to be encompassed or surrounded and be taken into captivity. Matter of fact, Jeremiah saw it in his days, and we don't know exactly where or how he spent out his days, but they totally exactly, we kind of know he stayed in Jerusalem as much as he could, and tried to at least help minister to the people there. But he delivered a message of hope in Jeremiah 23. And so that's where we're going to begin today, when we start thinking about the righteousness of God and what does that mean in his name. So Jeremiah chapter 23, we're going to look verses 5 and 6 there. And we're going to see that God promised a king who would be defined by that very term, by righteousness. So what does it say? It says, look, the days are coming. This is the Lord's declaration when notice it's God who says, I will raise up a righteous branch for David. He will reign wisely as king and administer justice and righteousness in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will dwell securely. This is the name he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. So just, 2 or 3 highlights about that when we think about Isaiah reflecting the prophecy of God that says there's going to be righteousness. There's going to be a king who is defined as such. And what does that actually mean? Well, if messiahship was left to a human vote, Jesus wouldn't get it. I mean, that's the way it is, isn't it? And matter of fact, he, in the hearts of many people today, doesn't get that vote. But God is the one then who says, I will raise up this righteous king. I will raise up the one. It's not going to be your decision. It's not going to be people's vote. It's not going to be those who say, oh, this person ought to be king because he's a great guy, or he has a great reputation or whatever. No, God says, it'll be my choosing. It'll be my person. I'm the one who will raise him up. And those days are coming. Well, they did come, didn't they? About 600 years, 500, 600 years after Jeremiah reflected this prophecy of God, Jesus came into the world. And he would be a righteous one. First, he says he will be a righteous branch for David. King David, where'd he come from? Bethlehem. Where was his home? There, and he was out of the family of Jesse, who was one who was a descendant of those before who were godly people. Where did Jesus come from? A descendant of David, and so it was raised up out of the lineage of David. So, where was Jesus born? Bethlehem. How'd they get there? Well, it's kind of complicated in some ways, but yet God is always in control, isn't he? And God got them there. He was born there in the city of David, but also then he grew up in Nazareth, which ironically, Nazareth means kind of like the branch town, it is like the like the branch that comes out. So he was born in the branch town. Well, in Zechariah, Messiah was known as the branch. He was known as this the shoot out of the stump of Jesse, this branch. And so does that describe Jesus? Well, yes, it does, doesn't it? But also this Messiah, this new king out of the lineage of David would be righteous. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, a couple other things that we might want to make note of, and that is, he says that this king will he will reign wisely, he will administer justice and righteousness in the land. So he's going to be a good king. He's going to be the kind of king who is fair, who gives justice, who is righteous, who will take care of the people. And it's interesting that also he says in this, in his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will dwell securely. In other words, this new king that's coming along, this righteous king, he is going to be one who judges right, and he's also going to save God's people, even in the north, even in the south. And even though Jeremiah didn't see it in his day, he knew by God's promise it would happen. It was going to take place. It's interesting, isn't it, how through the centuries now we've seen and we've lived and we have that kind of history. And even what we're going through today between Hamas, Palestinians, and the Israelites and the Gaza Strip, what's going on there in that mess, so to speak. It's interesting how God is still one who will take care of Israel and he'll save Judah. And he's going to do that. History's not on your side if you're against the chosen people of God. That's just the way it is, isn't it? Okay. And then he will be called the Lord is our righteousness. So this Messiah, he's been given a name by um, Jeremiah the prophet through God through Jeremiah the prophet. He's been given a name and righteousness. What does that mean? It means ethical or moral dimension of God's holiness. Moral perfection is what God is. It points to the reality that you and I are not righteous, but that God is, and He made us in His image. So, therefore, the potential of us attaining to that on our own isn't there, but attaining to that through Him is. And Paul said in 1 Corinthians 1:30, he said, "It is from Him that you are in Christ Jesus, who became wisdom from God for us, our righteousness, sanctification, and our redemption." And so that moral dimension of God's holiness is what Jesus embodied and what we see in Him. It's not in us, but it can be in us when we put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ. So that's what Jeremiah said. He promised a king who will be defined by righteousness. And then we jump over to Romans chapter 3. And folks, geez, if we didn't have to go to church, here in a minute, I could spend the whole rest of the day talking about Romans chapter 3 because there's just so much in that particular chapter. Paul has spent, the first few chapters of the book of Romans, is this letter to them, making the case that the Jews aren't superior to the Gentiles. They're both sinners. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. He's going to say in Romans 3:23. He's stating it over and over and over again that while the Jews may have had special privilege, they did not have special righteousness. They did not have anything over any other part of God's creation, uh, any other man, any other thing that God made. And, folks, it is God who controls creation. Scientists can keep looking at all these things way, 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 way out there in space. And all it proves to us is how big and how vast God really is. He's beyond measure. We can't even begin to comprehend all of this. So what does Paul say? Well, beginning in verse 10b, and someone said this is the series of no ones. So as we read through this, you might think about no ones. He said, "There is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. All alike have become worthless. There is no one who does what is good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They deceive with their tongues. Viper's venom is under their lips." How we doing time-wise? Oh, geez, we're struggling. Let's move on. Here we go. So these no ones. And notice he doesn't say uh, you're nobody, all right? In God's eyes, nobody's a nobody, all right? But these no ones, we just can't measure up, folks. There's no one righteous. There's none of us who really get it, who really understand it, but we try through the revelation that God has given us to comprehend what we know is truthful and right. Paul said there's no one who even seeks God. We might think that, well, I found Jesus here. I did whatever, No, folks, God found you and He knew right where you were from the very beginning. He came to you. It is God who reveals to us who He is. And it is He who takes the initiative and draws us to Himself. He says in verse 12, all have turned away, all alike have become worthless. And that term worthless is the same term translated out of the Old Testament when it talks about our sin and it says that we are filthy rags. It's while this is a Greek word and that's a Hebrew word, but it's the same word. It's the same context. We are nothing but filthy rags. Folks, our best in the sight of God's righteousness and His holiness and His goodness and His justice don't even begin to measure up. We might think we're good, but we're not even there. No one who does what is good, not even one. And if you're feeling kind of down on yourself, well, it gets worse. Here's what it says about humankind. Their throats are open graves. Why? Because we're just dead. Spiritually, we are dead without Jesus Christ. He said they deceive with their tongues. Boy, humans have a way of um, saying things or deceiving or using and abusing, don't they? Viper's venom is under their lips. That's pretty harsh words, isn't it? But there is no righteousness apart from God, folks. None. None whatsoever. There is no one righteous, not even one. Now, I'm just going to interject. Do I have time? I got just a minute. Interject a little thought here, and you might say, well, now the atheist doesn't believe in God. So no, you got this all wrong, people. You see, the atheist believes there is a God not to believe in. He's already made the premise that there is a God, and he is boldly, blatantly saying, I don't believe in him. That's what an atheist is. There's all kinds of people who are anti-God, and the atheist is the one who says there is not a God to believe in. But he's not true. He's saying, I still believe there's a God. So when Paul wrote, no one who understands, he is saying that the people of his day were unable to comprehend the true righteousness of God, because understanding is unnatural to sinful human people. We just can't begin to comprehend it all. Boy, there's more I could say about this, but let me just kind of jump to this. Those metaphors, open grave, deceive with their tongues, viper's venom under their lips, all of those point to the idea that people use their mouths to lie, deceive, and entrap others. James, the writer of the book James, in James 3:10-12 said, blessing and cursing come out of the same mouth. My brothers and sisters, these things should not be this way. Does a spring pour out sweet and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree produce olives, my brothers and sisters, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a saltwater spring yield fresh water. So we should use our words wisely if we want to exemplify understanding somehow of the truth of God. We need to talk about things that build up and not tear down. And then we jump down to Romans 3:21-26. Man, here's another 3-hour sermon we could do here. He starts out by saying, but now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been revealed, attested by the law and the prophets. The righteousness of God is through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe, since there is no distinction. He's spent this whole time up to this point saying there is no distinction between people. We're all the same in God's eyes. There's no distinction between creation other than man is the apple of his eye. He created God, or God created man, I'll get it right, in his own image when it came to creation. So therefore, the righteousness of God is through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. No distinction. Then verse 23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. God presented himself as the mercy seat by the blood through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his restraint, God passed over the sins previously committed. God presented him to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so that he would be just and justify the one who has faith in Jesus. And gosh, folks, there's so much there. But I guess the real question is how deep is your faith? How deep is your trust in Jesus? Do we really trust him? Do we really put our faith in him? The question isn't whether we are on some graded level with God. The question is, where do we really trust? Where do we really say, I want to follow Jesus? I've decided, no turning back, no turning back. Where is that? Where does that happen? God wants creation to all come and worship him. That's the whole perspective of it all. not because he's arrogant and not because he's demanding, but because he created us. And the only proper response is for us to say thank you and to bring glory and honor to him. Only when you redeem it do you get the benefits. He talks about the mercy seat, about God being on the mercy seat, and folks, there's this imagery there that we have been given something that we don't deserve. That we have a place, we have a righteousness that's not ours, and God has given it to us. We've been given what Martin Luther said, the great exchange. He called it the great exchange, and that is that we have been substituted. Jesus Christ was the substitution for our death, and he paid the price through his blood for our sin. And in that, we have victory, the mercy seat, that grace, that unmerited favor that God has given to us. We didn't deserve, but through Jesus, we have been given it. And he says at the end, he did all this so that he would be just and justify the one who has faith in Jesus. It comes down to faith. Do you trust him? Is your confidence really in him? When I was studying this, I thought about at least 3 or 4 people who live here in the neighborhood of the church. They don't come to church, but they're people I've talked with and built relationships with. And gosh, they're so close to getting it, but they just cannot surrender. And it's about surrender. It's really about saying, I can't do it. And as long as you keep trying to do it on your own, you may believe in Jesus. You may believe there is a Jesus. You may believe there is a God. You may believe that God saves people. But the true surrender is saying, I cannot. Only he can. I cannot get myself to God. That's the righteousness that we need, is to be able to say, I'm not right, but he is. Well, I trust that you put your faith in Jesus, and you haven't just said, yeah, I trust him, but that you're truly living daily saying, Jesus is my righteousness. God bless you all. Happy New Year. Bye-bye.